So hello, everybody, and welcome to the symposium on adolescence and type 1 diabetes. I'm Dr. Melanie Henderson. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist, and I'll be with you today with a dear friend, Janie Bédard. I'll let Janie introduce herself first.
Hi, my name is Janie Bédard, and I'm the director of Camp Carouanis, the Camp for Diabetic Children in Quebec. And I'm also the director of Fred's program, so the Fondation Ressources pour Enfants Diabétiques. And today I'm going to talk to you about my adolescence and what I went through during those years.
So I'm going to also present. I'm Melanie Henderson. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist at St. Justin Hospital. I'm also a researcher, and I have a keen interest both in terms of my clinical practice and my research on type 1 diabetes, and in particular working with adolescents. So we'll get started. I'm having trouble sometimes changing the slides, so bear with me for a second. There we go. So feel free to ask your questions during the presentation. We have the Q&A feature in the Zoom, and so you can just post your questions there. It's easiest if you do them there, but I'll also look in the chat as well at the end because we just finished the French webinar and it was in the chat as well. So I just want to make a full disclosure. So first of all, I love working with teenagers. I think teenagers it's a fantastic time in life. They're full of ideas and ideologies, and they're clever. And I love working with them. And teenagers are all unique, and they have their own strengths and their own challenges that they face. And I think we need solutions, and that those solutions are unique both to them and to their families. And much of what I'm going to talk about today is really around family, around parents and their adolescent with type 1 diabetes. But a lot of what I discussed today, I also use in my own clinical practice. So we'll start by talking about the impact of type 1 diabetes on the adolescent and his or her family. And there's a notion that's really emerging as being very important, and it's that of diabetes distress. Diabetes distress is the emotional response to living with diabetes, the burden of relentless daily self-management, self-care, and the prospect of its long-term complications. And unfortunately, diabetes distress affects a third of people living with diabetes. And this has a very significant impact. So first of all, it has an impact on self-efficacy. So the feeling that you're able to affect change in your life, to make a difference, to make things better. It also has a deleterious impact on your self-care management and engagement in self-care. So kids that have high distress related to their diabetes will not be as engaged in looking after their diabetes. And finally, high levels of diabetes distress are linked with negative or deleterious outcomes with diabetes. The Diabetes Miles Youth Study is an Australian study, and they did a fantastic job at polling. So they polled across the country youth with type 1 diabetes that are 10 to 19 years of age, and parents alike. And what they found was that among girls, 52% were worried about their weight. A third of boys felt that family and friends didn't understand what they were going through. And 23% of boys felt that families and friends tended to act like the diabetes police. And what I found was really interesting is that the parents felt the same thing. So 38% of parents felt like they acted like the diabetes police. And another 37% felt like their family and their friends didn't understand what they were going through. Now, if we look at other studies in terms of the prevalence of diabetes distress, the STEPS study is an American study, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on, but 40% of the teenagers participating in the STEPS study had high levels of diabetes distress at study onset. And if we look closer to home, the Get It study, which is a study that's taking place both in St. Justin Hospital and the Montreal Children's Hospital, and is a study targeting 16 to 18-year-olds and the transition between pediatric care and adult care with type 1 diabetes. Amongst those participants, 22.7% reported diabetes distress at baseline. And moreover, 59% reported self-perceived diabetes-related stigma. And what we found when we looked at these data is that both stigmatization related to your type 1 diabetes and diabetes distress were associated with a reduced quality of life. Now, if we look in the Better Registry, we also have some really interesting and really thought-provoking data looking at stigma experienced by the adolescents in the diabetes registry, so those that are 14 to 18 years of age. What did we find? So 90% of teenagers feel judged if they're eating sugary foods or drinks. 81% feel that they're victims of unfair assumptions related to what they can and cannot do with regarding their type 1 diabetes, or because of their type 1 diabetes. And the same percentage feel judged irresponsible when their blood glucose management is not perfect. So diabetes distress is very, very closely linked as well to diabetes burnout. It leads to diabetes burnout. And the idea is that people are just fed up and they just can't manage their diabetes anymore. And the vulnerable groups are adolescents, young adults, and parents and caregivers. And what are the causes of this diabetes burnout? Well, I'm not going to teach you much because for those of you who either have diabetes or who have a child with diabetes, it's always there. It's so demanding. It affects every aspect of life and becomes like a central preoccupation. And a lot of the time, it doesn't go as planned despite our good efforts. And so diabetes burnout inevitably becomes a normal response. But it's very serious when you get to that point because it's also intimately linked to depression and anxiety. Now, how can we countervene this? How can we fight back, if you will? Well, there's resilience. And resilience is not necessarily something that you're born with. It's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. And we can develop resilience, and it's correlated with disease management. So people who have strong or high levels of resilience tend to manage their diabetes better. And among youth with diabetes distress, we see that they have higher hemoglobin A1C levels. So their diabetes control is less favorable. And they also don't tend to engage in appropriate and optimal management behaviors. But that's really only among those that have low resilience. Now, can we develop resilience? And yes, we can. And how can we do that? So I mentioned to you before the STEP study, and the STEP study was an intervention that they designed to develop and further strengthen kids' resilience in the face of type 1 diabetes. Now, what did they do? So they tackled 4 different aspects. So they used group formats to do some cognitive, behavioral, and social problem-solving skills development. They also talked a lot about how to link beliefs, feelings, and behaviors, and challenging some of the negative thinking that kids may have and evaluating the accuracy of that belief. Like, okay, you think that, but is that actually true? Is that actually correct? Because if it's not, then maybe by changing how you think, you're going to change your outlook and your approach. In this intervention, they also promoted problem-solving techniques such as assertiveness, decision-making, and they taught the kids coping skills such as relaxation techniques and also seeking social support, which is very important. And the STEP study showed very favorable impacts, both in terms of enhancing resilience among participants and also decreasing diabetes distress. And what I think is most important is that they actually found that this continued on even 3 years after the intervention. So I think that there are things we can do to enhance resilience. And as medical practitioners, we have a responsibility to develop this better in our clinics. But I think we can do things also on the family front. And I think interactions matter. So I've said to you that adolescents are a very vulnerable group, both for diabetes distress and for burnout. And we know that diabetes distress leads to poor outcomes. And it's particularly concerning given that there's more and more evidence to support that the management and the control you have as an adolescent has a very important impact on your later health and later complications. So it's kind of a critical phase in life where we should be trying to do everything we can to get better control. But what do we do? So I think we need to be listening to our teenagers. I think we need to be showing that we understand them and that we encourage them. So how do we better understand teenagers? So this is a little bit of a diagram of the teenage brain. And, what is adolescence? It's that time when you're too young to do about half the things you want to do and too old for the other half. I think that here we have, the super turbo rebellion center, the cool gauge, the love for parents and disdain for parents. That's quite, you see that those are equal in size. So there's all kinds of things. If I had to add, I'd add like maybe a little dot like this, that would be the diabetes management center. So what is it? Where are we at when we're teenagers? So teenagers want to be the same as their peers. They don't want to be sticking out as different. I think that they also have an increased capacity for problem solving. And that's a really good leverage for us to try and find solutions for improving their diabetes control. I think that they can live very intense emotions, and that frustration can be very strong when adherence to the plan doesn't always work out as planned. I think that they also want more independence, and we want to encourage that, but also propose some support when they need it. Teenagers often have erratic schedules between school. Sometimes they have a job, they have after school activities. Their sleep-wake cycle is often perturbed. So schedules can be hard and make it harder to manage the diabetes. And also they feel that they're invulnerable. So, telling them, if you don't look after diabetes, you're going to have lots of complications 20 years down the road. To them, that doesn't really resonate, because to them, they don't have that problem. So now I'm going to pass over the torch to Jenny, who's going to tell us a little bit about how she lived her diagnosis and her adolescence with type 1 diabetes.
So hi, I just want to start my presentation with a little picture of me when I was 5 or 6 years old, just before my diagnosis. I was a really happy kid. I had everything in front of me. I was not shy at all, and everything was possible. Then I received my diagnosis on February 1997, and everything changed for me at that point. Something, I guess, inside of me, I can say, died at that moment. And since that day, I'm trying to go back to that little kid you see in this picture. So when I received the diagnosis, I was really scared. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know why I had to poke my finger every like 5 or 6 times a day. I didn't want to inject myself with insulin. I was really scared. And I saw my parents really upset and sad about my diagnosis. So I felt guilty about it really soon. And yeah, and I lost, I guess, everything that day. I thought I lost the possibility to go sleep to my friend's house. I lost the possibility to eat whatever I want. And I had an older brother, so it was really difficult for me to see him eat some cookies and cakes and candies, and I wasn't allowed to eat those things. So that was really hard for me. I lost the possibility to wake up at the time that I wanted, because if you go back to those days, the technology wasn't the technology we have today. So we had to follow a regular schedule to manage really well the diabetes. And yeah, so, and I lost the possibility to do whatever I want. So I saw the diabetes like an obstacle for me, and I wasn't able to achieve what I wanted to do in life. So yeah, like I said, I think something died inside of me when I received the diagnosis. Since that moment, for me, I was a diabetic. So the diabetes was taking all the place in my life and in my parents' life and in my family's as well. So from the beginning, I guess I had the really bad behavior with my diabetes. So I was hiding myself to eat some sugary snack. So I was eating cookies, candies, and cakes. So it was really difficult for my parents to manage my diabetes, because I was lying to them. I was hiding myself to eat those things, and I was lying when they asked me if I ate something bad, I guess. So it was difficult for them to manage my diabetes. My mom, I can say, was on a mission when I received my diagnosis. She wanted to save my life. So make sure I had everything in place to have a better life and make sure I was healthy. So everything went go through the food. So she tried to avoid all the snacks with sugar in the house. But I wanted so much to eat like everyone else. So I was looking around the house to find a spot where she hid the snacks. So yeah, it didn't work so well for me. Um, and my mom was always watching over me since the beginning. So she was always asking me like 5 or 6 times a day, what's my blood sugar, and if I'm in the good range. And she was asking those things before even asking me if I had a good day at school, or if I ate, I wait, sorry, or if I had a good night of sleep. So yeah, the diabetes was taking so much place in my life, and that was really hard for me from the beginning. So when the adolescence arrived, everything was in place to go down for me. So as an adolescent, like Melanie says before, you want to be normal, you want to be like everyone else, you want to get your independence, and also you're not listening to your parents' advice, even though if their advice are really good. And you want to do whatever you want. You want to be in control of your life, and you want to um, to um, to take control of your own things. So that was really difficult for me during the adolescence, managing my diabetes, because I was in a rebellion about it. So between the age of 12 and 16, I guess I can say I took about one blood sugar test during a week. I didn't inject myself the right amount of insulin. I was guessing the amount of carbs in my meal. I was just giving enough insulin just to go through my day and make sure I was okay. And I was in my head, I was controlling everything. I was in charge, and that was the way to manage all the stress, the anxiety, and everything around diabetes. I was in control of my result because I was lying about the result of my uh, blood sugar. I was in control of what I ate. I was in control of my diabetes, and that's what I thought. Today I can say I was not in control, but at that time, that's what I thought. Um, at that time, I developed a eating disorder because the diabetes was so about the good food that you have to eat. So when I entered the high school, I was allowed to eat whatever I want. My friends had the lunch that I was trading with them because their lunch was better than mine, I guess, and with more snacks with sugar in it. Um, so yeah, since the beginning of my diagnosis, I had a really bad relationship with food, and that was increased during my high school years. Um, I went to see a psychologist because I was going down the road. My A1C was really bad. When I went to see the doctor, I was lying about my result, but the A1C doesn't lie, so it was really difficult for me to accept the diabetes and to manage really well my diabetes as well. Um, so my parents were trying so hard, and the doctors as well, to help me go back to the right way. But for me, that was the only way to control my life. It was to choose the amount of insulin I was injecting myself, to choose what I want to eat. And yeah, and I didn't see the consequences that could happen in the future if I continue on that path. Um, Something that really helped me through my teenage years is the Camp Carouanis, so the Camp for Diabetic Children, and FRED, so the Fondation Ressources pour Enfants Diabétiques. When I went to camp, I finally realized that I wasn't alone. I was normal for for a time. I could speak, I could talk normally. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't feel judged by anybody. Everybody speaks the same language. That's really helpful during your adolescence. And finally, I found a community and I found a second family there. So the friendship that I made during those years, I kept them during the years. So it helped me during the rough time that I had to manage my diabetes during high school. So yeah, Tiam Caruanis helped me a lot during those years. And I guess I can give you some advice what to do to help your kids or your your teenager during those years to make sure the communication is keep going and you can help him or her manage their diabetes better. So active listening. So I've have an open communication with your kids. Make sure they can talk to you and they don't feel you're gonna judge them. It's really really important. Make sure they have the right to feel what they are feeling. So sometimes we feel mad, we feel tired, and we feel upset about having diabetes. It's a disease 24/7, and you don't have any breaks. So sometimes it's really really hard, and if they are allowed to feel those emotion, it's really important for them. So if you give them the open space to leave those emotions, that could be good for them. So give them the right, be empath have empathy. I guess the presentation went out, Melanie.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No problem.
Sorry. I don't know what I did there, but sorry about that.
But that's okay. Standardizing things. So blood sugar is a really important aspect of managing diabetes, but it's not the only thing. So don't make it all about blood sugar and an A1C result. It's so stressful for your adolescents, for your teenager, and so stressful for you, I guess. But there's so much pressure on them. So just celebrate all the trials and successes to go to have a better A1C or have a better management of their diabetes. It will be really helpful for them to feel they're not alone to manage all those things. And yeah, so they're not failing every time they don't have the right A1C number. It's really important. And my last advice for everybody is to not wait to enter the adolescence to put those strategies in place, because all those things you can begin to apply them at the beginning of the diagnosis. It's gonna help them to go through adolescence, because if the active listening is present during the first years of the diagnosis, then when they're gonna enter the adolescence, it's gonna be really easier for them to talk to you. And if you let them have the right to feel what they have to write then from the beginning, it's really gonna help during the adolescence as well. And sorry. So yeah, it was really difficult for me during the adolescence. But today I'm 30 years old, and it's been 25 years since I live with diabetes. I'm not gonna lie. At the age of 18, I realized that if I was going to still have those bad behavior, I will probably not reach my 30 years old. My 30 years old. Melanie, can you help me with that?
My 30th birthday.
Thank you. So I decided to control my diabetes and see my diabetes not like I'm that the diabetes doesn't define me. It's a part of me. So today I'm Janie and I'm living with type 1 diabetes, and I'm not Janie and I'm diabetic. So that's really different for me, and it's important to know that. I'm not gonna lie, some days it's really difficult to live with type 1 diabetes. I could go through a bad day, so ups and downs, high and lows, and I want to throw my pump through the window because I'm just so tired of all the problem that I can have. But tomorrow it's a new day, and it's easier for me to go through those days. So yeah, it's a disease 24/7, but it gets better with the years, and I'm giving the right to feel what I have to feel. And every year I celebrate my diagnosis birthday. I don't know if I can say that. just to encourage myself and go look back to where I start and when I am today. So I'm really proud of myself, and I'm still learning and I'm still figuring out some things. But yeah, it's not an easy journey, but we can live with type 1 diabetes really well. So that was my testimony.
So thank you, Janie, for that. And I think that hearing the voice of someone who's been through it is so meaningful, and to have come through such a hard phase and then come out so victorious is really inspiring. And I just want to say to everybody that Janie and I did not really talk about what we were going to present today very much. And when we showed each other what we were thinking of doing, it just fit perfectly. And I think it's just another element to sort of support the fact that this is a major preoccupation for teenagers, diabetes distress, and how we can help them build resilience and help them to manage their diabetes through this difficult time. I'm sorry if the slides shifted. I was looking because a lot of what I'm talking about today was inspired by some presentations at different conferences internationally by Jill Weisberg-Benchel. She's a psychologist that works with type 1 diabetes patients. And anyway, I just wanted to look up her name, and I guess when I looked it up to say it right, I got off the Zoom. Sorry about that. So I want to go on and talk to you a little bit about how can we as parents of youth with type 1 diabetes, how can we help to build resilience and find a way to kind of work together to improve things? I think the first thing is our expectations of what our kids can do must meet up with their skill level and their level of understanding. So they can engage in certain activities if they are able to do it developmentally, but also are understanding what they need to be doing. I think we need to be careful with our tone. A lot of my patients tell me that their parents are always nagging them. And I know that what parents are really trying to do is just help out, monitor, supervise, but we need to be cautious about how we go about that. A little bit, I think Janie was, hinting to that, in that she has type 1 diabetes, but it doesn't define her. So the first thing in the morning that we should ask our children is not, what's your blood sugar, but, how'd you sleep kind of thing. So I think that, we can learn a lot from the people who've gone through this before and sort of alter the way we present things. This is very important, this next point, the idea of normative independence goals. So like, what is a normal goal for a youth of a given age to attain in an autonomous fashion? So a lot of parents tell me, yeah, they're old enough to do it, perhaps, but they may not be ready to do it. And I think that we need to distinguish what kids should be ready to do at a given age. For example, make their bed, do their homework independently, help clean the house. Those are kind of tasks that build autonomy and that are normative. All kids must learn that. But measuring your blood sugar, counting your carbs, and giving your insulin is not part of those normal behaviors that kids need to learn in order to grow and become independent adults. And so the ability to take over those tasks can vary in terms of age, and sometimes they're able to, and then there's regressions. And I think that we need to be able to normalize those feelings of burnout, plan for them, and tell our kids, no, this is not a failure, that you're fed up and that you can't do it right now. It's okay. We're going to find a way to help you out. And I think Janie in her testimony was really speaking a lot to that notion of helping, supporting, and being there for the youth. I think that we need to encourage positive behaviors. When parents and kids come to my office, even if things are going catastrophic, there's always a few things that are going well. And we should always underline them and underscore them and encourage the kids to keep going, because that's going to be helpful. It's not by telling them off about everything they're not doing or not doing well that we're really going to make them feel empowered to do things differently. And I think it's very important also that we listen a lot and talk less. And as parents, it's very important to do that, because kids will inevitably feel like we're telling them what to do, how to do things. And that's the thing they don't want to hear. And so if we're there and listening and only talking 20% of the time, but really listening 80% of the time, I think that's going to have a really big impact on how the kids feel about our level of understanding and respecting them in where they're at in terms of their diabetes. And I think that, there's nobody that's an island in of themselves, right? So we're never really truly independent, and interdependence is the key. I think that families and kids that are isolated, that leads to poor medical and psychosocial outcomes. And I think that what's really compelling for families is to, look at what the responsibilities are, lay them out, and then discuss who can do what. And schedule times when the responsibilities just turn back to the parents temporarily. And I have this discussion a lot, both with the teenagers and their parents in my office. And I say, I know that you can do it, but right now, everything that's, that we're seeing is that it's too hard to do it. And maybe mom and dad can help out. And it's not to make them feel like, children and incapable, rather just giving them a break, we talked about encouraging positive behaviors. And I really feel, and I want everybody listening to know that when you come to your doctor's office and you have, we're downloading data, or you have a blood sugar that you've written down, or we're not looking to judge. It's not a report card. It's just data to help us sort out, what's going well, what's not going well, what's tougher, how can we help? And I think that we need to recognize the constant, never-ending challenges that diabetes poses for a young person and their family, and praise that young person and their family for the things they're doing well. And I think we can never do enough of that praising. And I don't think kids learn or benefit from being, told off, or, in French we say chicané, like just kind of, chastised for not doing things right. And I think that another element that's very important is encourage the co-development of solutions. So not saying, this is what you have to do, but saying, what are you prepared to do? What are things that you find harder? What are things that you find easier? How can we make things better? And as a team, and the team includes the healthcare professionals, but also the parents, and of course the teenager themselves. And so the idea is, there's no magical sauce per se, but if we had to make one up, it would be really to be listening, to be supportive, to collaborate and work together to try and find solutions. So in conclusion, a significant proportion of adolescents that live with type 1 diabetes experience diabetes distress and the risk of burnout from managing their diabetes. I think that we need to understand diabetes distress in children and adolescents based on their developmental stage, and understanding where they're at and how all this can impact them. I think that we have a responsibility, and this is very much the medical community, to implement real-world interventions to decrease distress and burnout and enhance resilience in order to help kids overcome this. But I do think that at home, a little bit with the things we've discussed, we can also make a difference. And I think that families and healthcare teams working together can make that difference. So I want to thank you for your attention, and we're opening up to questions and answers that we can exchange. It doesn't have to be a question. It can also be sharing. Earlier in the French version of the webinar, families sort of shared a little bit things that they found difficult or things that they found were helpful. So please feel free to share with us. And I'm just going to put the last slide is the upcoming next webinar, which will be in February, looking at weight loss and type 1 diabetes. So just while you're kind of making up your questions, in the earlier session, one of the things was that came up quite a bit was, how do we sort of diabetes distress and burnout around school. And so we discussed then, the fact that, so there's simple tricks we can do and there's more complex things we can do with school. So first of all, whilst it's true that many teenagers don't actually benefit from having a nurse in their school that can support them, some do. So it's important to go and see what are the resources at school that can be helpful. I've had patients that get texts from the school nurse. Did you, what's your blood sugar? Did you not forget to give your insulin? And just that sort of helpful hint and reminder was something that was helpful. I think as parents, simple things like taking over lunch making. I know it's boring. I hate making lunches and I have to make so many, but making the lunch for your teenager, putting on it little stickies with how many grams of carbs are in the lunch, that can be helpful because I think that sometimes that task of counting your carbs, it makes it more complicated. So sometimes little things like that can be helpful. I know that the technology that we have now, so with our continuous glucose monitoring, we can have bells that go off for if the blood sugar is low or if the blood sugar is too high. And sometimes that's super helpful. And sometimes kids just find it annoying and disruptive. And I've said to them, okay, shut off the alarm. Just keep the one for the low because you don't always feel your lows. And that way, you know that you have to take some juice or some Dex-4s when it's ringing. So sometimes it's altering the way we're using our technology. And sometimes it's just going back onto simpler things. I have put kids back on the good old fashioned NPH insulin so that they don't have to give themselves injections over lunch if they needed that break, So I think we need to show a lot of flexibility in the way we manage things. Shani, do you remember any of the other kind of questions that had come up?
The one with voyons. Sorry, I have a.
There was one about ADHD.
ADHD, that's the word, yeah.
That was the one you were thinking about it. So yeah. There was one mom that sort of expressed how it was hard for her child with ADHD to manage the diabetes. Everything seems frozen to me here. I don't know if you guys can still hear me.
Yes.
Okay, good. So, that again, we talked about the dual impact of ADHD and medication for ADHD. First of all, that kids are more distractible and having a hard time focusing on these details. And then second of all, that a lot of the medications they take for their ADHD cuts their appetite and then makes it difficult at lunchtime. So, my view is that we must really never push kids to eat if they don't want to eat. And so we have to adapt our insulin treatment to their inability to have a full lunch. And that's fine, that there are ways of doing that. And then in terms of helping them to remember, then we can maybe use the technology, the alarms, and then sometimes reminders, texts. Sometimes I've had kids that put on their desk, and especially the younger ones, a piece of paper with what to do. So all kinds of strategies that we can use to help out. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions. Jenny, do you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, for some reason, everything's frozen on my end. But so listen, I thank everybody for participating. It was lovely for us to be able to share on some of the things that we think are really important. And I think the webinars will be made available to participants through the Better site. So have a wonderful end of day. And we look forward to having you with us in February for the next webinar. Bye-bye, everybody.